Welcome to Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. This season, we're reading Matt Cawthon's perspective. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 9, our first Matt episode in The Shadow Rising, Book 4 of the series. I'm your co-host, Lajara Dane of the White Oddjaw.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Semerus, a scholar from Ilion. Now, I want to remind you that The Wheel of Mind is an in-depth character reread podcast, so be warned, we may drop a spoiler from any book of the series at any time. Now, I want to get us kicked off today with Chapter 2 of The Shadow Rising, entitled Whirlpools in the Pattern. This chapter begins with a Perrin point of view and then leads up to Matt's perspective, where we pick up. Our favorite rogue is sitting in a fancy apartment in the Stone of Tyr, playing cards with some wealthy noblemen's sons. While Matt far prefers dice, where his luck runs the strongest, his tavern nature still weaves the pattern of the cards in his favor more times than not. Piles of coins lay haphazardly in front of the other 5 players, while Matt keeps all of his in a purse. It's just an old habit he had formed while gambling in the rougher taverns. The lordlings gossiped of women and ships and trade while they played cards. Matt stayed in the hand, and the newest card that was dealt to him was called the Ruler of Cups. That made 4 ruler cards in his hand. If he got one more, he could not be beat in this game of chops. He began to feel luck tickle the back of his mind. Just then, one of the lordlings, the richest and the drunkest at the table, made a joke that was in very bad taste, and everyone looked around nervously, afraid of upsetting Matt and his best friend, the Dragon Reborn. To smooth things over, Matt quickly decided to begin telling a funny story, and started telling him about the Aiel women and a game called the Maiden's Kiss. Now, Matt spun the tale to make himself look a bit of a fool, which broke all of the tension and kept the other gamblers at the table. Then the men began to ply Matt with questions, asking him to intercede with the Lord Dragon, who had made a proclamation that anyone, even one of the Lords of the Stone, could be brought before a magistrate. Others wanted information, inside scoop if you will, asking if the rumors of an upcoming war with Ilion were true. Matt paid the wager to stay in the game another hand, and the next card he received was the Ruler of Flames. It had a picture of a fictitious Amerlin seat. Matt's luck had just worked to gain him all 5 ruler cards. "The light burn my bones to ash if it's not so," he muttered. Just then all the men around the table accused him of speaking in the old tongue, and they worked to sloppily try to translate his statement. Outside just then a rooster crowed, and the Amerlin on Matt's card was suddenly holding a dagger instead of a flame. Then the 2-dimensional figure stabbed the back of Matt's hand. He kicked back, simultaneously throwing his chair backwards and flinging the table upwards through the air. As his cards flew through the air, the figure started climbing out of the card and began growing life-size, as did those of the Ruler of Cups and the Ruler of Rods. Matt drew 2 daggers, threw them into the first 2 figures, drew 2 more knives, and threw one of them into the third, all before landing on his back. Just then the cards were back to normal size, pinned to the wall with his knives. All of the other players yelled, were scrambling around on their hands and knees collecting cards and coins, declaring that they had seen nothing out of the ordinary, but their wide eyes and their shrill denials showed the lies. Thus ends Matt's part of Chapter 2, Whirlpools in the Pattern.
The rooster crowing that shows up in Perrin, Matt, and Rand's perspectives to show the reader that those happen at the same time, these bubbles of evil. The first time I read that, I thought that the rooster crowing was going to be some biblical allegory, especially when I got to Matt's perspective. I didn't realize it was the same one every time until I got to the end and the rooster didn't mean anything else. I thought it was going to be an altered version of the account of Peter denying Christ 3 times.
Right.
So I don't know why I thought that was going to be related, but I think because Matt sort of is trying to distance himself from Rand in this chapter, and he's been doing that anyway, but to these nobles, he's trying to say like, I'm not like his friend or anything. not like you think I am. For some reason, I thought Matt was going to be our Peter here denying the dragon. Turns out that wasn't the case. It was the same rooster. It
Well,
wasn't 3 times, and it was a sign of death, apparently, is what Perrin and Matt both said.
yeah, yeah. There was some old superstition tied to it, and I think it had to do with a rooster crowing at night. It wasn't
Oh,
crowing
yeah.
during the day, but the rooster crowed at night, and that's supposed to be some old superstition. Someone's going to die. Things are going to happen. Bad luck. It seems to me I couldn't remember if it was Perrin or Fael that said it. I wanted to say Fael
Mm,
at the beginning of the chapter, but anyway, in Perrin's point of view, that it was stated. And then in Matt's, and to me, it seemed like they had a slightly different take on what was supposed to happen.
yeah.
But with Fael, I think she said it means someone's supposed to die, and with Matt, he just said something like, he didn't believe what his dad had always said about that,
Mm,
and it didn't give a lot of detail. There was just some old superstition tied to it. But it's no wonder that our minds would take us there when we hear this 3 times. Again, that's just something to show that all of these events happen simultaneously. But since we read them sequentially, to think of the biblical tie-in there, because quite frankly, Robert Jordan does tie in a lot of religious, iconography and
mm,
events into the story to make things more familiar for us. As far as the events here, I love the scenes in this chapter.
mm-hmm.
It's a rather long chapter if you go through the entire thing when you have the 3 different perspectives. And it seems like the one with Rand and Barrelane just seems like it was an entire 2 chapters in and of
Yeah.
itself. Her coming into his room, and then he sees his image coming out of mirrors, and he has to fight his image. It's very close to what Matt saw as far as what started as a 2-dimensional image coming out of wherever it
Mm,
is and attacking. But in Rand's case, it becomes 3-dimensional when it steps out of the mirror. And of course, in Perrin's case, it was his axe that came alive and was fighting he and Fael. But so I love, because you could see this in a cinema format. You could see this on the screen so well. Perrin fighting with the axe. I mean, that's not even going to be difficult to show, because it's in his hands. After the first half
mm-hmm.
second, when it flies across the room, it's his hands the entire time. So it would be an easy thing to film and to show. With what we have here with Matt, with the playing cards coming to life, it can be done very easily through CGI. Similar thing with Rand and his sword fight with himself. Although it would be hard to show how he drew them into himself with the one power, basically pulled. They were trying to suck the life out of him, and he basically sucks them into himself.
Mm. You might could
Um,
hide it with a big flash of light kind of thing. Sort of,
yeah, or kind of show them drawing, kind of hoover into
yeah.
him, more or less. I mean, there's ways of doing it, but so in a way, I hope it's there in the show. But I never really bought into the bubbles of evil
That
thing.
one's a tough
It's
one
almost
for
like,
me too, I will say.
yeah, it's kind of like Moiraine just came up with a theory, and then everybody runs with it. I almost wanted to say, hey, what if this was actually Lanfear trying to get him to make a move against the other Forsaken, thinking it's an attack by one of them, or something crazy,
Mm,
something that the Forsaken had done, or some kind of direct strike from the Dark One, but it's so muted because he still has 4 seals between he and the world. I don't know, which I guess in a way that is similar to the bubbles of evil, but yeah, the bubbles of evil just seems too generic a thing, and you don't see it happen enough to be an integral part of the story. To me, it never really added to the story or moved the
and when
story
it comes
forward
up
any.
again after this, it's very different. So this is the only one that's where the things that are happening to our characters are like big and symbolic and related to them specifically. Perrin's axe
Right,
attacking
right,
him, Card attacking Matt, Rand's self attacking him. The rest of the
right.
time, it's like, well, the laundry might just strangle you. Sucks to be you.
Yes,
There's nothing you can do about it. We see it happen
right.
at least once in Saladar, but I want to say that we see that kind of thing in the middle of the series happen multiple different times, where just kind of household objects start to try to kill you, or other laws of physics don't work anymore, like your prison, part of your prison might melt. I think that happened to somebody. They were able to get out of a jail cell because the stone melted underneath them.
See, I had forgotten some of the other manifestations of it. I remember there was a few events.
Rooms start rearranging where they are in the tower. Like, there's no coherent predictability in what's going to
Oh,
happen from a bubble of evil, and I think that's kind of the point. Well, okay, the pattern's just kind of warping from these random bubbles popping up, but it's just, this is the one that stands out and is so weird because it does seem so purposeful. And that's part of what made it difficult for me to buy into the whole concept.
Right. And it was so personal to these three.
Mm,
Like you said, with Perrin is already afraid of the axe in a
yeah.
way. Just as it's almost symbolic of his fear of the wolf.
Hmm.
He's afraid of the wolf. He's afraid of using that side of his nature and him becoming the wolf. He's afraid of the axe because he doesn't want to be a warrior. He doesn't want to be a killer. He wants to be a blacksmith, and this entire, dichotomy that comes up between the hammer and the axe. And that's such a big part, a huge part of Perrin's story arc that, you see that being a personal thing. The one of the things he hates about himself turns on him. It wasn't the wolf nature, except it was the axe, which in a sense, in some way almost represents that, or is, I'd say, is a parallel to his wolf nature, is just the fact of that axe turning on him. That's a part of his life he wanted to get rid of anyway. I mean, if he could, he's just not really able to because of, the things that he has to face, or not able to at this time. With Matt, the side of his nature that he uses the most, the gambling side, is in one sense his Achilles heel. He's using his tavern nature for, self-interest. For he used it to feed his greedy nature, and use it for greed rather than anything else. At this point in the story, again, later we see him as a general, as a leader, as all the things that he didn't really want to be, but the tavern nature and his luck brings him there. Right now, he's just using it for greedy self-interest.
I want to jump in and say the fact that it's the Amerlin card is also significant to Matt because he is so afraid
Oh
of Aes
gosh, yeah,
Sedai. We need to come
yes.
up with a good word in the fandom for that. That's like something phobic for people who hate or fear channelers. I think that would be,
Isophobic or
yeah.
something. Yes. See, I didn't even see the imagery of that, but you're right. Yeah, I think that's significant that it began with her, and then King of
Hmm.
Cups, or the Ruler of Cups, which is the ruler of Tyr, which right now is Rand,
Oh
and
yeah.
he's wanting to distance himself from
Hmm.
Rand, he cannot. And then I think the Ruler of Rods, who's the Queen of Andor.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and he didn't really have anything against her, but right now the ruler of Andor might as well be one of the Forsaken.
He also has issues with nobles in general too. So the fact that
Yes,
it's
yes,
all
and you could say it would represent
the
that.
royal flush, as it
Yes,
were, that's attacking him.
and the other two cards, thankfully, remained there on the table, quiet. So if he'd had all five rulers, I don't know that he had six knives with him.
Mm.
He might have had it. You can never have too many knives, and so I'm sure he might have had some more, but he certainly couldn't have drawn them and thrown them before he hit the floor, which is an amazing
Yeah.
feat. And to throw them with that kind of accuracy. I mean, again, this is the tavern nature coming out in him too, to have that kind of accuracy while he's flying through the air. And it describes it much like you see, Matrix like,
Yeah.
time seems to slow down as he's, it's just his reaction time and the adrenaline where it seems kind of drawn out. And here he is throwing knives while he's still flying through the air. Didn't remember drawing the second pair of knives, but he drew that third one at the Queen of Rods as she stepped out and had this giant staff basically in her hand that could have crushed his skull. So, and he's trying to twist around so he kind of land on his feet, and he doesn't pull that part off. He kind of lands in this crushing little heap, and then trying to scramble and get up real quick. So, the entire thing to me is so cinematic the way it's described. I'm really hoping that gets to stay in the show. I'm just hoping they put a different um, tack onto it, as though it were an attack by one of the
Yeah.
Forsaken, or a distraction sent by one of the
I think
Forsaken, or
that would make
something.
more
It,
sense because I can imagine that all the metaphysics of how the pattern works and trying to imagine it visually of this, piece of fabric with bubbles coming up from underneath it. I don't think that type of abstract stuff is going to fly with show viewers very well who are not already serious rereading fans of the books. All of these theoretical explanations for how the world and the pattern works reads a lot to me like those books about theoretical physics that explain to you how
yes,
the stuff in sci-fi could actually be real or not. They're always talking about how,
right,
imagine gravity being a bowling ball in the middle of a trampoline, or imagine a warp drive being wrinkling the fabric and kind of jumping from one point
right,
to
right.
another. And that's the sense I get from this bubbles of evil thing, and I just don't. I think that's not going to be something most viewers would grab onto. So I agree with you that this should be a Forsaken attack in the show.
Yeah. On science fiction shows, they will bring up a display and they will, kind of display this and explain these concepts to, one of the crew members who doesn't understand or whatever, which is ostensibly showing it to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. In this case, that would be difficult to do. But now they may do it and they may pull it off. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess you could have Moiraine like weaving this sort of hologram of light, and as she explains
Well,
stuff,
yeah,
that
yeah.
would be kind of neat.
Yeah, I didn't picture that, but that would be a good one. Yes. So yeah, there are ways of handling it. We'll just have to see where they go, and we really don't know right now. It's just pure conjecture, and I'm sure in a couple of years, looking back, if we listen to this podcast again, we're like, "Oh, what idiots! They did that so wonderfully in the show." But right now, we can't imagine, or I can't imagine that being integral into the story without confusing things too much. But and the entire scene may not make it, but I love that it's in the story, and so I love it as just part of the canon of the Wheel of Time. This is one of those, again, things that's so easy to picture in your mind. I think my biggest drawback to this is I kept picturing Matt being in a tavern when this happened, by memory,
Oh.
when I'm
Mm-hmm.
remembering that scene, instead of being somewhere in the stone itself where it actually happened. So I was a little surprised by that on my reread. I'm like, oh, I kept remembering this scene, but I kept remembering it, happening somewhere else because it's so easy to picture him in a tavern around
Yeah.
a group of rough men. And that's not the setting this time. But I remembered all three of them very clearly. And there's so many things about this story that I forget easily. There are so many events, I'm like, oh, crap, I had completely forgotten that, Nynaeve faces off against one of the Forsaken and is equal to him in power, things
Mm.
like that. That I've come across those things since, and as a lot of little small detail things, especially in my reread, but to see it, this is one of those things that stood out clearly in my mind, and I remember them happening pretty much simultaneously, but I had totally forgotten the setting of where Matt was and the men he was around. But the images of of this happening, and suddenly time goes back to normal. He's landed on the floor in a heap, trying to get up real quick, and the cards are stuck to the wall through the by knives, and yeah, it's just such a perfect image. You just see the knives still quivering
Yeah.
when everybody's getting up, like what the crap. So yeah, one of the scenes that I love, and whether it's Perrin fighting with the axe, or Matt's scene with the cards, or Rand's with the mirrors, those really stand out as being a great part of the story. We'll just have to see if they keep it in the show or not. I desperately hope that they do. Couple of other observations, and we'll see if you've got
Mm-hmm.
any. I'm sure you do because I missed so many details. I loved it when the guys have started to get off track, and this one, he's so drunk and he says something that would have upset any other noble, would have ended the game. As it was, there's this kind of long pause, and everybody's looking at each other like, "Oh crap, he went too far." He's talking about things he shouldn't talk about in front of Matt. And Matt, he kind of processes it, and he goes through his thought process, which I love the way Robert Jordan handles this with Matt. He follows the rabbit trails of all these different thought processes, the branchings of thought that Matt takes, and Matt decides, if I don't handle this with some humor, then they're going to get up and leave, and I can't win their gold. And so he makes the decision. The only thing he could think of was talking about the maiden's kiss, because they'd been talking about the sea folk women, and some of them wanted to go down and try to get a date with some of these beautiful sea folk women. And so Matt just brings up the Aiel and the maiden's kiss, which was kind of funny because you find out Ruark had mentioned it to him. Oh yeah, there's this game these girls play, and he never would have pictured Ruark as being the kind of person to pull a joke, because Ruark is so stoic and so serious all the time. And then Matt finds out it's a joke that they'll sometimes play on young men who don't know. But the description of all the maidens standing around him with a circle of spears around his neck, so that if you move, I mean, you're gonna get hurt. And then one by one they kiss you, and if it's a good kiss, they back up a little bit with the spears. If it's not a good kiss, they lean in a little closer. He told it in such a way to make himself look like a fool,
Mm-hmm.
but you could tell it was an uncomfortable thing. he thought that, oh, this sounds like it could be a fun game, and all of a sudden here's these spears, and it's not fun anymore, and you get to kiss all these girls, but you can't relax and enjoy the kiss because, the more nervous you get, the more the closer you are to death. And with Aiel, you don't really know whether they're joking about killing you or whether they're really going to kill you.
Yeah.
You just don't know. We wetlanders do not understand Aiel humor in any way. So yeah, I just love that whole interplay. But the way he tells it as being a joke and kind of making himself look like a fool, so they'll all relax and they'll stay in the game so he can win their gold. It's just a great way of telling what happened, and yet but telling it in a way that only Matt really gets.
Yes, he smoothed over Estion's faux pas really well. The one who had mentioned the Aiel and got everybody so upset. And Matt
Yes,
seems
yes,
to have a knack for that. He's pretty good with some people, and especially nobles, it seems like. This is the beginning of it, but he only continues this throughout the rest of his story. He kind of charms nobles and gets them around him all the time. So these guys around this table end up in the Band of the Red Hand. All of them
yes.
actually end up fighting with him at some point.
Oh, I did not realize
Yeah,
that. Oh
I went
wow, I
and looked
should
them
have, but
up.
I didn't.
Some of them, like at least one dies kind of early, like in the Fires of Heaven, but the rest of them, almost the rest of them are there till the last battle. Estion, I think, the one who was so drunk here, actually leads the band during the last battle while Matt's facing off against Padan Fain.
See, I'm now that you said it, that sounds familiar. I had not remembered those names from this point to that
Oh
point in
yeah,
the
well I
story because
wouldn't have
there's so
either.
many characters brought
Yeah.
in. So, oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
He draws these folks around him. He also draws Tylan's eye in a way more of a negative way later on, and
Right.
Tuon's as well. So he really has got a way with people. He's got this politically savvy, charming kind of personality where if there's tension, he knows how to try to relieve it and smooth things over. And I thought this was a really good example of that. And especially because people see him as such a rascal and such a jokester anyway, that's a good way he could get people's attention off of other things, and he uses that so expertly here.
Yes, yes. Because he reads people. He knows what to say to smooth things over. He knows what to say to cause someone's hackles to rise if
Mm-hmm.
he really wants to. The way he caught up with one that was hunting Nynaeve and Elaine and Egwene, and caught up with them in the taverns, and
Oh
he
yeah,
just said just the right things
Komar.
to cause the guy to slip. Komar, thank you. Cause him to slip up and get some information out of him before they started fighting. If Matt were serious and wanted to help people, he would be like a great psychologist, psychiatrist,
Yeah, he
because
could.
he reads people almost instantly. If there were such a thing in his world, he could be like the mentalist. He's one of these that could read people
Yeah.
and take advantage of them. He'll take advantage of them in cards or something. He thinks that's fair enough. But yeah, he's one that could scam the little old widows out of their livelihood if he wanted to. So he's got all these different directions he could go, but because of the world he's in and the places he's in and where he keeps getting drawn into Rand's orbit, he's perfect for where he is right now. But I just love when you see all the potential of what Matt could do, because he's so good at reading people and knowing what to say to ingratiate himself to them, to make them relax, to really just draw them in. And he's not intending to draw people around him. He's not trying to build an army. He's not
Mm-hmm.
trying to, make these men his men. He's just wanting their money. But the fact that he's so good at this, yeah, he gets their loyalty, to the grave. So it's really awesome. Some of the things I like about him. So,
Yeah, he's so
um,
useful to Rand's mission, being so politically savvy like this with people. I really see more than I used to. Rand could not have won the last battle without Matt being such a magnetic personality and who just falls into military leadership. He didn't have anybody else in his coterie that he could really trust with a force like that, but Matt is putting together this force that's international. He ends up getting people
yes,
from all these different nation states. So he's picking up all these guys from Tyr here, but he also gets the ones from Kyrian later, and that's really important.
right,
And Perrin obviously does a great job of building back up the two rivers and helping it to flourish and bringing those people into the last battle as well. But
Right.
I imagine that's a much smaller force than what Matt is able to command. So his skills were
Yeah.
so much
It's
more
just.
important to the pattern than I realized. I kind of just saw he's the one with the luck. I don't really know exactly what he does. He also likes battles, but I see now how his charismatic personality really helps with that.
Yes, yes, it does. Because Perrin brings a force of men that are very useful from the Two Rivers, but he took time. It took him like a year or so to build up what he had to do and what he had to go through and to earn their respect,
Mm-hmm.
to be their leader. Matt just hangs out with these guys, plays some games, gets their money from them, and next thing you know, they'll follow him anywhere. So he's not trying to do that. He never really has to earn their respect. Um, but they see his, well, like you talked about his political prowess, they see it almost as political genius instead of
Mm-hmm.
just reading people and being lucky. Winning the battles as the leader of the Red Hand, they see this as, oh man, he is so, so genius at this. I've got to keep following him. When really he was just, lucky and had memories from dead generals. So he didn't. He never tried to go about building that army. He never tried to go about building their loyalty. In fact, he wanted so many times to turn on them. Except he did have this one attribute that I think really helped him out among the military men, is that if you were one of his, he was loyal to you. Now, he
Mm-hmm.
would talk like he would kill you. He would talk like he would run off and leave you in the middle of a fight, but he never would. He was sort of the Malcolm Reynolds, from Firefly, where
Oh.
he's a scoundrel, and yet if you're one of his, he will fight and die to protect you. Now, he may talk bad about you, but nobody else is going to. And he might mistreat you, but nobody else is going to. And so he has, some similarities between those characters there, and the fact that Matt is very loyal to his men, but he never asks them to be loyal to him in return. But they give it because they see those qualities in him. They admire those qualities so much, and but it's like that just comes natural to him rather than him having to earn it. So anyway, just some things I saw about it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other takes on this chapter?
Yeah, I do. I want to dissect a little bit more of the dialogue that comes after the Maiden's Kiss story, but before the fight with the cards.
Ah,
So
yes.
Matt is rightly outraged at the crimes against the common people that the High Lords want to continue to get away with. That's part of what they talk to him about. Like, hey, can you talk to Rand for us and make sure we don't have to go to jail for assaulting farmers' daughters or, kicking peasants, all that good kind of stuff. And so he rightly challenges Estion on it. He gets kind of rude back. He thinks I could have bitten my tongue here, but I won't. And he suggests, well, maybe it'll come to hangings next, huh? Unfortunately, all of this seems papered over by the time Matt founds the Band of the Red Hand and these guys end up joining it. And most of them end up being officers, high-ranking officers in the band as well. It's not clear which one of these guys has committed what crimes exactly, other than Estion's allusions again to the farmer's daughters. But regardless of what he or the others have specifically done, they're all kind of complicit as members of this ruling class who don't want to use their privilege for any good and want the laws not to apply to them. They're a part of this oppression and torture of the commoners, which seems so much worse in Tyr than in some of the other nations. We see that servants and farmers are very well treated in places like Andor, for example. We saw Matt in the last episode want to be as far as possible from the people who use those torture instruments that were hanging on the walls, but he ends up becoming war buddies with these guys who were probably doing those things, or at least people in their families were, and they're a part of this system. And I don't remember it ever coming up again what potentially scummy people these guys are. Even if they change, they just kind of end up being, well, those are just the rascally boys led by Rascal in Chief Matt from about
So
the
that,
Fires of Heaven
yeah.
onward.
So it's kind of the past is the past, but let's just move forward with what kind of men they are now,
Right.
more or less.
Which I guess that's the only devil's advocate thing I could come up with is like, well, maybe they've changed by then. And I feel like that would be similar to like hanging out with people who've done lynchings or something, or who might have been a part of a mob
Right.
like that. It's, if anybody deserves to be put away for the rest of their life, it's folks like that. So I'm a little grossed out by these guys being just the guys in the band later on. And I get that, like, this is the
Mm.
apocalypse, so maybe you can't just pick and choose who you want to have on your side. You might have to ally with people that you normally would not want to be around to get the job done. And that
Right.
seems to be a theme in this series with, they have to ally with the Shan-Chan partially to win the last battle. They have to bring in the White Cloaks and other people that they would rather not associate with at all. But that kind of raises the question to me about the whole good versus evil battle in the series. So what does this metaphysical evil that you're fighting against mean when slavers, rapists, torturers, murderers are fighting for the side of the light? So what is evil if it's not those things? And it's kind of a problem I have with the whole series in general. It's almost like you could use spiritual evil as an excuse to brush past some of the grounded real world evil acts. So you could say, like, well, this guy might be a murderer or a rapist, and Tuon might be a slaver, but at least they're not dark friends. At least they're not allied with the devil. But, like, what would a dark friend even look like? They'd probably be doing things like that. So I don't know how to answer that, but it's just a weird philosophical issue that I feel like this chapter reminded me of, that comes up a few more times throughout the series.
Right. Well, I can say it in my mind. It would be much easier to work with Shan Chen and White Cloaks than these Tarian dogs who've always been allied against my people in Ilion.
Exactly.
We've always looked down and know what kind of evil they were. To answer the larger question, and I'm going to play Forsaken's advocate just for a
Yeah,
moment
yeah,
here.
I'd like that.
If if the Dark One is allowed to be released, and he will corrupt the entire pattern, there will never be anything good.
Mm.
By being able to seal him away and win the last battle, then that kind of gives humanity a chance to find those good things they have and work on those and try to get rid of the bad.
Mm.
So, it's not an end to war, it's not an end to evil, because as long as humanity exists, there will always be war, there will always be evil. There are some things we cannot seem to correct or educate or use religion or anything to completely cleanse it from the people and from society. It's part of an inborn human nature that people become selfish. I mean, if we never had a better example of it, you have really good, nice, tender-hearted people right now going in the grocery stores and buying up everything they can get their hands on because
Mm.
they're afraid they won't have it in a week if they don't, and so they keep it from everyone else. They're not trying to be evil, but their actions lead to some very bad things.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's a small comparison to make, because that's nothing like slavery, and that's nothing like the torture of people and things like that. But if it were not, for winning the last battle, then they could never grow beyond that.
Mm.
We can look just in American history. America has been complicit in genocide of the native peoples here.
Yeah.
We were complicit in slavery that was nothing like how slavery was carried out by most people throughout
Mm-hmm.
history. It became more brutal and horrible. And of course, almost every people group in the world have had slavery at some point in history, but that was, it's been gotten rid of by most societies, now, thankfully. But things like that go on, and a lot of times you have to survive and hold together to get to where you can root those things out as far as systematic.
Mm.
Now, again, there's always going to be evil, there's always going to be bad, there's always going to be murder and thefts and other things. But when those things become systematic and accepted, then we can say this is a societal evil, and we've got to fight against that. But you have to be able to survive as a society to get to the point you can stand up against that.
Yeah, that's a really great message. I like the way you kind of turn that around for me. um, and I think we see the seeds of that happening with some of these most problematic groups. So maybe we're supposed to get out of this that these guys will be improved by being around Matt, and their societies will be improved by this huge social upheaval we're having by the dragon coming to power, and that Galad becomes Lord Captain Commander of the White Cloaks, and we can imagine him being such a lawful good character that he's going to change the White Cloaks quite a bit in their conduct and their mission and root out a lot of their evils. And we can also imagine that Matt being placed so high in Shan-Chen culture could have a huge impact on how their society works. He's he's already gotten Tuon to admit that she has the ability to channel, and she still hasn't gotten to the point of acknowledging that collaring channelers is wrong. But maybe that's on the way, since he has and maybe not with her, maybe with their child, because she's pregnant by the end of the series. So Matt's influence may be able to change a lot of these evils now that we have taken out the biggest bad at the last battle. Maybe we've got the resources to handle all the others. That was a great point.
And I had totally forgotten about Tuon being able to channel. Wow.
Yeah.
There's so many things in this story that as we get into it, I was like, oh, wow, I knew that, but I'd forgotten that.
Well, because she's a Sul'dam.
I have so many of those moments.
They all can't have the potential to learn, but they wouldn't naturally become a wilder or end up dying from channeling sickness or anything.
I have so many of those moments, and I guess it's just old age, Before long, I'll be able to hide my own Easter eggs and things like that. But I had so many things. I didn't look all of them up, but there were a few Matt moments between this chapter 2 that we just talked about and the chapter we're about to get into. I guess one of my favorite it was from Egwene's point of view. When they're at Tyr, they go and they're kind of sitting near a wall where it's a 30-foot drop down. There's some gardeners down there working, and she and Matt are talking. And Egwene has the thought, I wonder if he could survive the fall if I push him off.
I know.
The way Matt's just running his mouth about things. And I literally laughed out loud driving down the road at that point. She's like, no, he might land on somebody,
Yeah, she was like, not the roses, the gardeners. Yeah, he might land on
Right, yeah, not the roses, the gardeners, yes. There are a lot of moments in the story where I laugh. Literally, I'm driving down the road listening to it on my commute, and I will just start laughing out loud at many moments. But there are more Matt laughter moments in this story than anyone else's. And that's why there is a brightness from book 3 on within the Wheel of Time, and that is because we have more of Matt's point of view.
Yeah.
And it could be funny and entertaining in the first 2, but until you really start to see the world through his eyes, you don't appreciate the depth of his humor. And so, so many of these moments are either by him or about him. He becomes one of my favorite, more memorable characters.
I'll have to keep an eye out for whether Path of Daggers, I'm still in Lord of Chaos, so that'll be a minute, but book 8, Path of Daggers, has no Matt in it. A wall falls on him at the end of book 7, and he's not in book 8 at all, and then we pick back up with him in book 9. So I want to see how funny Path of Daggers is to kind of test out that theory, because I bet it's probably not all that funny with him missing.
Yeah, because in my personal re-listen this time, I'm in The Shadow Rising, and I got halfway through chapter 13. Which I think is the one you're about to summarize for us.
Yeah, it is.
Want to get us caught up and take us there, unless you have anything else about chapter 2.
Well, just a quick recap about the stuff that had happened in between. So Matt did have that conversation with Egwene you were talking about from her perspective, and the result of that was her telling him about the Twisted Stone Doorway ter'angreal, which we're going to get to in our next episode. So we're already set up for that, so we can understand a little bit more about what he's musing about in chapter 13 when we get there. And what else happened in between was that there was another battle in the stone. So there was the one we just went through to take the stone in the last couple of episodes, and then we have another one where some Trollocs and Myrddraal snuck in through grain shipments, which nobody noticed why there were grain shipments coming to Tyr instead of away. It was supposed to be going to Cairhien. And then at the climax of that battle is the one where Rand uses Kalendor and a mysterious remembered weave to destroy all the Shadowspawn at once at the end of it. So Matt has just been through that. So he had that conversation with Egwene about the doorway, and now he's been through this battle, and he's going to drink about it in the tavern. That's where we pick up in chapter 13, Rumors. This chapter is pretty short, and my summary of it is kind of short too. So I'm going to actually begin with reading the whole first paragraph of this chapter, because it so beautifully sets up the ambience of this bustling, lively 17th century inspired fantasy tavern. I really love it. The tavern's business rocked along like any in the mall, a wagon load of geese and crockery careering downhill through the night. The babble of voices fought with the musicians' offerings on 3 assorted drums, 2 hammered dulcimers, and a bulbous semseer that produced whining trills. The serving maids in dark ankle-length dresses with necks up to the chin and short white aprons hustled between crowded tables, holding clusters of pottery mugs overhead so they could squeeze through. barefoot, leather-vested dockmen mixed with fellows in coats tight to the waist, and bare-chested men with broad, colorful sashes to hold up their baggy breeches. So close to the docks, vestments of outlanders were everywhere among the crowd. High collars from the north and long collars from the west, silver chains on coats and bells on vests, knee-high boots and thigh-high boots, necklaces or earrings on men, lace on coats or shirts. One man with wide shoulders and a big belly had a forked yellow beard, and another had smeared something on his mustaches to make them glisten in the lamplight and curl up on either side of his narrow face. Dice rolled and tumbled in three corners of the room, and on a number of tabletops, silver changing hands briskly to shouts and laughter. I can just hear and smell and see this environment. I can even feel the
Yes.
warmth and like the smoke in the tavern and everything. It sets the stage so beautifully.
Like you said, very 17th century inspired, yet at the same time, with the noise and the din and the variety of people there, I can almost expect the tavern owner to say, "You'll have to leave your droids outside. We don't serve their kind in here." He's such a rogue, and here he is in this crazy den of thieves. But yeah, you're right. It's beautiful. I shouldn't make fun of it in that way, but it does bring Mos Eisley Cantina to mind to me just a wee bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Just the entire ambiance of the sound, the smells, the heat, the laughter. It's just so well described, as only Jordan seems to be able to do.
Yeah, so Matt is sitting in this environment, moping away alone in the tavern with some wine. And uncharacteristically, he's staying far away from the dice games and serving maids. He's reliving the terrible battle in the stone that no one seems to understand or want to talk about. It was terrifying, gruesome, and confusing. Just after killing a gray man that had been after him, Matt found himself losing a battle with a Fade, until Trollocs killed the Fade, seeming to pay Matt no mind. He finds himself musing about what Rand has pulled him into, and about escaping from that fate. Matt was just ready to leave the tavern when he heard some Lugarder boasting about the false dragons compared to Rand. But another name from another speaker at that table drew Matt over to them. Among a diverse crew, a Kandori merchant had mentioned the lack of tobacco crop coming out of the Two Rivers this year. When Matt has the truth out of him, the merchant admits that some rumors say that white cloaks in the Two Rivers are looking for the dragon reborn and some fellow with yellow eyes. Matt threw the man an Andoran gold piece for his information and left, marching straight from the mall to Perrin's rooms in the stone. He finds Perrin already packing his things, obviously having heard the same news. It's too close to the truth. According to Perrin, Rand had only raved about it incomprehensibly, without any indication that he would go himself, so Perrin has to. When asked if he will as well, Matt thinks about it. He's worried his mother will marry him off to settle him down if he returns, but he's also worried for his family. When he tries multiple times to say aloud that he will go, the words will not come. Perrin chalks it up to tavern taking them down different paths, and they wish each other the best. Matt reminisces about home and his unreliable memories, and curses the fact that he even has trouble remembering his sister's faces. He's on his way to do something important, but gets distracted by Barrelane ignoring him in the hallway, and also by thoughts of a plump cook's helper named Dara. We end the chapter with Matt having an outburst, cursing Aes Sedai and Rand, and this was witnessed by a servant, to whom Matt threw the gold he claimed was from the biggest fool in the world, and advised that he spend it well on women and wine. And thus ends chapter 13, called Rumors.
This is one of those where you begin to see how the web spun out by the tavern not only change the threads around them, but bind them in place. Because as you see, Matt, he not only gets this information about the Two Rivers, of course, Perrin had overheard it as well in a tavern, but he wants to go. He wants to go so badly. That's the first thing on his mind is, I've got to go help save the Two Rivers. He thinks about his family. He thinks about his way of life. All of those things. But he cannot go. And up until this, he's been kind of ruminating on all the times he wanted to leave. He's come up with 1,000 excuses to leave, but every time there's some reason not to. And even now, it's just sort of an internal tugging. He cannot say it. He cannot think it. No matter how bad he wants to leave, he cannot. Yet when he talks to Perrin, Perrin felt some of the same things. But, he had this one overriding thing that was a bigger excuse. I must go. And it's kind of strange. I think in my first read, I saw this as more of a, well, Perrin just has a stronger personality, more self-discipline. He's making himself do it. But it's really that the pattern is shaping him into different roles, and the role for Perrin must go through the two
Yeah, he's
rivers.
got to train for his ultimate goals.
Right. The role that Matt must play cannot go through the two rivers right now. He's got to stay central to Ren. He must be in Ruidion soon. That's just one of the things he doesn't know about. There's no prophecy or anything concerning it. But when you see his story arc from beginning to end, you see that that's a place he had to go to be, or to ultimately become who he needed to be, and to know how to deal with the Ilfin and Elfin, whom he kind of meets here in Tyr, but he's got to meet them again and find out that they're a little more devious than he realized, and before he can face them that third time to save the world. So it's part of his story arc, and the pattern understands this, and the pattern is got, the wheel has got to shape him a certain way, and his path cannot take him through the two rivers right now.
Yeah, and the way that he can't even get the words out is like somebody who's taken the oath on the oath rod trying to speak a lie.
Isn't it?
He
Yes, you're right.
physically can't. And we've seen before how when Matt says something in earnest, he will follow through. We've talked about that a lot
Right.
now, and it's going to keep coming up. Apparently the pattern knows this about him too. That's why it won't even let him get the words out, because it knows, and he knows, that if he says it and means it, he's gonna do it. So it won't even
Right.
let him get that foot in the door of saying the words. His destiny really does lie elsewhere, and that's really going to
Mm-hmm.
start in chapter 15 in the next episode.
Yeah, and typical Matt fashion, even though he's struggling and he's upset over that, it's almost comical that he can't even say
Mm-hmm.
it. I mean, it's just like, how could you have such a serious moment with ultimately the fate of the world riding on this, and he can't say it, and it makes it funny somehow because it's Matt, and I don't really know how. I don't know how you pull that off, but it works, and it really does. But yeah, such a struggle for him. You see him. I picture him almost in tears, trying to say, "I'll go with you, parent," and he
Yeah.
just can't say the words. Um,
But you could also see that really funny, like you're saying, and it reminds me of like scenes in Liar Liar.
That's exactly what I was about to
Yeah.
say. Yes.
You could
Right.
play
He's
this
wanting
really
so
comically
hard.
on screen. Yeah.
Right. Right. And I don't know that they'll play it up that much, but it has that potential. Yes. There's just tying himself in knots, trying to say something and just cannot physically do it. Oh, man. So anyway, I love that imagery. Thank you for saying that.
My other big point about this chapter is just how despondent Matt is. He's in this tavern, which is where we often find him. So, the fact that that's the first paragraph is not really a surprise. You expect by the time you get to the next paragraph that, okay, Matt's going to be rolling dice in there or something. But instead, he's moping around, drawing pictures in the wine on the table with his finger, and he's staying as far away from the dice and stuff as he can. He's having these flashbacks to the battle, and he's really confused about it too. And we've never seen him like this, except for he's obviously was weird when he was dagger cursed, and before he had that fully
Right.
separated from him, and the last healing that he went through. But he's been through a lot of other scary, gory combat situations before this most recent battle for the stone. He's faced at least 2 other Gray Man assassination attempts before this one that he's recalling, but he seems so much more upset and affected by this one. And I think the difference is this one was really confusing. It seemed like the Trollocs
Yes.
rescued him by killing that Fade, and he can't make that makes sense. He can't make it fit into his narrative about who he is and his place in the world. He was already struggling with that in the first place, about what
Right. Right.
his purpose is. And part of how we cope with different events in life is keeping a consistent narrative of who we are, our values, how the world works, what it means when things happen to us. There's usually some sense of purpose even when negative things happen. And so part of why trauma is so affecting is because it disrupts that narrative. It may violate your
Mm.
expectations about how you think the world works, or whether you think people are fundamentally good, or you can't trust these rules of how your story was operating anymore. And so,
Right.
that can explain why the same event, even if different people experience that very same event together, it might be only mildly troubling for one of them, but be full on traumatic for the other one, because they would each have different narratives that might or might not be violated by this event. So different
Right.
events could really overload our ability to cope compared to other people. And that's when you get trauma, when you get PTSD, is when you've overloaded your coping abilities in that moment. It doesn't necessarily matter what the event is. And so therapies for PTSD, many of them recognize this, and they can focus on trying to reintegrate that event and that trauma back into your
Mm-hmm.
life story, so that there's kind of a consistent story to you there. And that can help lead you to really positive outcomes like post-traumatic growth, where you look back on the events not wishing that, if you had it to do over again, you would do that again, but realizing that you would
Mm-hmm.
not be the person you are today with the purpose and place in the world that you have today if you had not gone through those difficult things. So Matt
Right.
is not at a point yet of reintegrating this trauma back into his story, or even figuring out what his story is. And I think his personal narrative was already so vulnerable. And then you have this really confusing event like Trollocs aren't supposed to be good, they're not supposed to save my life, or I'm so important that somebody would send someone to assassinate me, and more people to assassinate me, and more people to prevent them from assassinating me. None of those things add up to him. And I think that's why he's
Right.
just so shell-shocked sitting in this tavern like this. And maybe I broke down this scene way ttoo much, but it's really not like him to be sitting there not dicing. He might be dicing and thinking about some weird battle flashback, most of the time that we see him.
Right. Yeah, because it is so atypical. How many times have we seen where he's touched on something that made him uncomfortable, and he said, "I'm just not going to think about that right
Yeah.
now." And I've after you brought it up a few episodes back, I've noticed many times throughout the story, well, I can't think about that right now, and he just moves on,
Mm-hmm.
and somehow just does not touch on that thought again because it made him uncomfortable, and here he can't escape it.
Yeah.
And I had thought of that part of the moping was the fact that he wants to do something different. He wants to move on. He wants to be far away from Rand and Tyr, though he still has this nostalgic care for Rand, but he doesn't want to be near him right now because there's all this channeling, there's all this politics going on, and that's just not his thing. It's not what he wants to be in the middle of. So he wants to leave and can't leave, and I had seen that as the source of some of the moping.
Yes, I do
Um,
too. I really just see that weird situation with the Trollocs being that kind of straw that broke the camel's back. I think those
right.
factors you were talking about made him vulnerable in the first place.
But you're right. Those are the things he's thinking of. Those are the flashbacks he's having. And Robert Jordan, having been a Vietnam veteran, I'm sure understood that those weird moments of reflection and had trying to process and deal with PTSD. I'm sure could kind of write that without having to explain it.
Hmm.
And I had never looked at it from that point of view before. I appreciate you bringing that up. I have noticed that with a lot of people, humor is used to hide pain.
Yeah.
You look at the documentary of the lives of any famous comedian, there's usually a lot of childhood trauma there and pain, different types,
Hmm.
different things for different people. But so often the humor we have is a coping mechanism to deal with the pain of the past or even the present. And so I've wondered about that with Matt when you were bringing up what you did, if some of the funny things he might not be his coping mechanism to deal with situations like this,
Yeah.
because you're right, that was just totally confusing for him, and it would be for
Hmm.
anyone. Now we saw Rand's point of view during that battle where he had Landfear there, and she was explaining some things.
Yeah.
Now she never just said, "Hey, some of these Trollocs belong to one Forsaken, some of them to another. Some have orders to kill you and some have orders to protect you." But it was just the fact she was there. It kind of let you infer there were different forces at work. It wasn't just one group of Trollocs. There wasn't just one mission there. There were conflicting missions. But Matt had none of that. He didn't even know Lanfear had been there.
Yeah.
He has nothing to take these puzzle pieces and make them fit. And so they don't fit for him.
Hmm.
And there's no way he can figure it out. And I think that helplessness, the helplessness of his own past, the holes in his
Yeah.
memories, and the helplessness of not being able to leave Tyr like he wants to do, all of it just comes crushing in, and it's too much to just laugh off at this moment. Later on, yes, yeah, he'll be able to laugh it off, but yeah, right now he's just, like you said, drawing on the tabletop with the wine, trying to figure out life and where he is, and he really can't.
And it's such a rare moment for Matt. I did not remember this chapter at all. I guess it's not one that I would have spent a lot of time on my first read through, but it does stand out when you're looking at his story just by itself and going through chapter by chapter the way we are.
Right.
It's one of those very realistic times that you don't often get to see enough of in many fantasy and sci-fi and speculative fiction stories in general. You don't get to
Hmm.
see the characters stop and have to deal with all their trauma and all the stuff they've just been through. They don't usually have a lot of moments of rest anyway in a very dynamic story like this one. So I really like. Yeah, exactly. His story is it's got a very breathless pace to it, and this was a really interesting welcome chapter out of that. When I first picked it, I kind of was taking it just so you and I could trade which one is the action-packed chapter every time, and I thought, oh, this one will probably be kind of boring, just a filler chapter between things. I didn't expect to have this many thoughts on it, so I'm glad it turned out to be the little gold mine that I didn't expect it to be.
Right. I'm glad you chose it because you went so much deeper with it than I did. I read it, but I didn't even stop and analyze why he was doing what he was doing and why he had these musings and these thoughts, and you broke that down so well. It keeps him from being a one-dimensional character.
Hmm.
He's just a goof off rogue,
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, you see a lot more depth here at this point, and I appreciate you bringing that out.
Did you have any more thoughts about this chapter?
I believe we have covered it pretty well,
Yeah.
and I hope all of our listeners enjoy this as much as we do. I know we're breaking things down. Sometimes it may seem like we're overanalyzing. I just can't help but think, Robert Jordan wrote a lot of background about his characters. Some of it made it to paper and some did not. But I just can't help. What we're trying to do is just discover more about the person he pictured Matt to be, and covering a lot more things than just made it to print. And it really brings a lot of realism to me. It brings me closer to the characters, closer to the story. I hope it does the same thing for our listeners. So I hope all of you out there will join us next week for episode 10, when we delve into and examine chapters 15 and 24 of The Shadow Rising.
Where we're going to go into the doorway. I'm really excited about that.
Yes.
Subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play, Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, and that one's under the name Lajara Dane, LaJaradayne, to get notified when a new episode drops. For links to our website, email, and social media, visit our Linktree, linktr.ee/Lajara. And we would really appreciate it if you would leave us some feedback. It really helps us find new listeners if you rate and review the podcast on your preferred listening platform. Or you can always contact us through our email, lajaradane@gmail.com, through the Twitter, Lajara or the contact me form on our website. I, for some reason, just got so entranced by that first paragraph and being very placed in that ambience. And, it might have something to do with the fact that when I work a lot of times, I put in the background a YouTube video with some kind of ambience. So there's a coffee shop noise video that I place in the background while I work. And there's a bunch of other really cool soundscapes that a lot of ASMR content creators are putting out there and stuff. But there's a lot of them that will be like fantasy tavern ambience, or the green dragon from the Lord of the Rings soundscape, or whatever. And so I could just hear this as one of those. I could imagine sort of turning the volume down on this tavern and it being the background noise, so I could sort of focus on things. Because I put so much attention on that first paragraph, I noticed the musical instruments that they mentioned. And part of the reason I noticed this was because I had been thinking about what kind of music technology they had in this series and how it parallels real world history, just from when I'd asked my warder, as you know, who composed our intro music. I had asked him to do that for us, and he asked me some about the series because he wanted it to sound a little authentic to the time period it was sort of inspired by. And so he picked that sort of reedy instrument that you hear is an oboe voice, I think, in the software that he uses. So anyway, when I read the names of musical instruments here, I had to go and look them up and see what they are because I don't really know 17th century musical instruments.
I don't either. Thank you.
The hammered dulcimer is really cool. I looked it up, and I'm going to link the YouTube videos that I found for these too in the description of the podcast so that y'all can find them. But the hammered dulcimer video is really neat. It has sounds sort of like a piano, sort of like a harp, because it's this like table full of strings, and you can hit some of them with a hammer, which is where you get the piano type sound, because that's really what you do with piano keys is you hammer strings, right?
Yeah.
And then you could also pluck them, so parts of it will sound like a harp or a guitar or other stringed instruments that are handheld. So you can make some really beautiful sounds with this one. The other one that he mentions is not real. So we have people from the 13th Depository, which is one of those blogs kind of like tarvalin.net or, Dragonmount, one of those websites that's like really useful for the fandom. So the one he mentions is a semseer, Semseer. The 13th Depository thinks that might be a shawm, Shawm, which is a real world instrument. And I found a video for that too that I will also link in the description, but it's a really big reed instrument. And I think it was the first double reeded instrument. I'm not a huge music person or whatever, but if you were in band or whatever, maybe that means something to you. And it was the precursor to the oboe pretty much, but it makes this awful shrill sound. It's real ugly.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm so glad you did that. I can't wait to look that up because in my mind I had pictured a hammered dulcimer, something completely different.
Yeah, same. I thought it was like a little lute guitar looking thing or whatever.
Right. And I had, in my mind, when I heard the semseer, I'd kind of pictured or I guess imagined this reedy sound, almost like you get from India, some of the musical instruments they have that are, very high and shrill and reedy sounding.
Yes.
And just sort of what I had imagined in my mind. So I can't wait to check these out. I think that will make the ambiance of that tavern a lot more real if we listen to those, what we think those instruments may have actually been. Now, I can't imagine all three of them going at once. It must have been a pretty large tavern.
Yeah. Yeah, they had like
well,
3 drums and a hammered dulcimer and a semseer. It was kind of wild.
2 hammered dulcimers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, and I didn't know if they were all playing the same song or if you had one playing one song over here and one playing another song over there.
Yeah, I can't figure that out either. I wasn't sure if they were like a band or just had their own little corners or whatever.
I pictured this entire cacophony of opposing songs going at the same time.
Yeah, that's kind of the vibe I got too.
Yeah, but no matter how you imagine it, it was very creatively written. I love you, dear. I hope you have a great day.
Love you too.
Stay safe out there.
Yeah, bye.